Okay, so this is where we left off on the last class, guys. We did the drawing first, obviously. So we made a contour drawing, and then we shaded the back wall, which we have created on our own. We don't actually have a back wall that exists on our still lifes. And then we shaded the apple. So remember, too, that we did not want to add our darkest value anywhere. So, you can see my value scale right here that I did on my worksheet. I still haven't put my darkest value down. And I'm going to wait. We're going to wait for that last dark value to the very end of the project, okay? And I'll show you. Here is my drawing from First Bell. So this is where we will end today. So we're going to shade the paper, the construction paper, and the cast shadow. And then I'm going to show you how to do the shade in the stem too. And then a lot of you guys have already even noticed too, you have a cast shadow off the stem. I'll show you how to do that too. Okay, so this is where we will end. Okay, so you want to make sure you have all your supplies out. You want both of your erasers, your pink and your kneaded. I'm going to kind of put this stuff off to the side. You want all three of your pencils. And then I also have just a regular pencil handy because I do like to use that eraser on the back of that to get in some of the tight areas that this cannot help me with. So that's handy to have. And then, of course, you have your drawing. You need your worksheet out because we're going to be referring to this again for our next steps. And then you need 2 pieces of scrap paper. So I'm going to walk around and just see if anybody needs scrap paper before we start. See here. You're going to need one to go behind your project because as we shade this paper, you are going to be working around the edge, so you want a piece of paper behind it. And you're going to need a piece of paper to protect your project from your drawing arm. So I'm going to go around and see if anybody needs paper first. We are ready to start. So, you want to look at your project, okay? Remember, this is one of the things you got to remember with this. You have to constantly remind yourself where your light is coming from. For me, my light source is coming from the right side, okay? So that means everything on the right of my still life is going to be light. And then as it moves towards the left, everything's going to get darker. Cast shadow is going to be a little bit of a different story, and we'll talk about that later. Okay? Now, if your apple is on the left side and your cast shadow is going to the right, you're going to be the opposite. Your lightest side is going to be on the left, and it's going to get darker as it moves over towards the right. Okay? So you want to make sure that you are clear where the lightest values need to be, because that's one thing you don't want to make a mistake on because it's really hard to lighten stuff once you've laid down some layers, okay? So I'm going to look at this value scale again at the top of our worksheet. So this would be a good thing to have out while you're doing this so you can just have it as a reference. So remember, we're not putting in right now, we're not going to put in our darkest value. The darkest value we're going to get is maybe medium dark, okay? We will do this at the end of the project. So when you look at mine, okay, my light's coming from the right, so this is going the wrong way. So I'm going to turn this around. So that matches more or less what I should be seeing on my construction paper, which is what I'm going to do next. So over here is going to be white, and then it's gradually going to get darker as it goes this way. So that's how that's going to look. Now, here's the other thing. Try to move this up so those of you that are in the back can see this. Do it that way, that's better. So when we shade this, we are not going to shade this going up and down like we did the background. We did that, and I had to do that for a reason, to make this look like it's a wall, basically going straight up. This, however, we want the paper to look like it's on the table. So when we do this, if you guys look, we want these lines to go diagonal. So I got my pencil down there. We want the lines to go diagonal. And this is going to make it look like it has perspective. And it's going to look like a tabletop versus the wall that goes straight up. Okay? So you want to have an angle. Now, you can choose, you can either have your shading lines go this way, or if you want to, you can go the other way with your diagonal. Just as long as you're consistent, you're fine. Okay, so you can go this way, or you can go this way. Whatever you think would be most comfortable with your hand. Okay? So if you want to, you can go ahead and put your pencil down on top of your paper like so, on how you would like these shading lines to go. And then I'm going to come around and check before we start. Okay, so checked everybody. Everybody's good. So we're going to go ahead and start now. For me, I can't shade a diagonal like this, keeping my drawing this way. So I'm actually going to turn this. And again, feel free to do that yourself. That will help out tremendously with just getting that diagonal nice. So I want to make sure that I have one of my pieces of scrap paper behind my project. The other one is going to go directly on top of my project because, again, I don't want to wipe over all of this while I'm shading. So I'm going to cover that up. I'm going to start with my 4H pencil. Going to give myself a nice edge to shade with. And if you can find the edge you used before, that might make it go quicker. And then what I'm going to do, if you guys look, see how I've got my paper turned? I'm going to kind of use that as my guide for what I need this angle to be. So I'm just going to kind of use, again, the angle of my paper to help me, just to guide me on that angle. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start on the darkest side of my drawing. So make sure you're on the right side. I should say correct. And you're going to shade right up to that cast shadow. So you're not going to shade past that edge. Now for me, my cast shadow does go off of my page, so it is splitting my paper into two sections. For a lot of you guys, you probably aren't going to be in that same situation as I am, so this will be a little bit easier for you than me. So again, I'm going to use this paper to help me guide with my angle. And you should be adding this 4H to the darkest side of your paper. And I just kind of keep pulling my paper down and my arm down. Try to zoom in a little bit. Now, even though I am in the darker area, I'm not really pushing down on my pencil. But at the same time, I'm not concerned about having a super light layer here. Again, I like putting this 4H underneath even the darker areas because I think it helps all the pencils, the different colors of the graphite to blend in together. They're just such different tones. Now, the end of this, or what will be basically the way you're looking at now, this is the top, it's going to be darker, and it's going to get lighter as it comes down. I need to leave a small portion of this white down here. So at some point, I'm not taking this 4H all the way down. I'm going to have to fade it out to white. And you should see that contour line that you used to define your cast shadow disappear as you work around it. We do not want to see that outline when we're finished. If you see the outline, it's just going to look very unnatural. And our goal here is to make this stuff look realistic. So I am starting to lighten up my pressure, so I can start moving into some lighter values. I can always make stuff darker later if I need to. And in my opinion, I do think that's the easiest way to approach it. You can always make things darker. It's just harder to go the other direction. So if you make something too dark, you have to grab that kneaded eraser, and sometimes when you use that kneaded eraser, things can look a little patchy. So I'm going to start to lift off here. So I'm going to lighten up on my pressure. So I can start fading off to white. Again, please make sure that you are doing this on the right side, on the correct side. So you should be working your way towards the lightest value. It's getting a little tricky for me here because I'm at the end of the paper. So I'm going to start to lift off here, line this up, and blend it out to white. There. So that's what I've got. And I did just the bottom of mine because, again, my cast shadow splits up my paper into two sections. So my white starts about, and I'll put my pencil down, my white starts about right here. That might be too much white, but I'm okay with that for right now because I can always make it darker later. So now what I'm going to need to do is I need to match this over here. So make sure that my angle, use my paper again to act as my reference. So the rest of you guys who don't have to deal with this like me, just keep going. Once you get your first layer 4H done, then what you can do is focus on kind of filling in any areas that looked a little patchy. Now if you still see the line where the back edge of the paper is, you should see that disappear as you shade in the paper. Again, we don't want to see any outlines. That contour drawing should disappear as we shade. Now for me, this probably is happening to you guys too, up here in the top, your apple kind of hides some of this and covers up some of the paper. So Again, you want to make sure that you're not going past the paper's edge or the cash shadow edge. You want to keep everything looking nice and neat and clean. Alright, so that's what that looks like with just a layer of 4H on it. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to be ready to start my 3B. So I've got my 3B right here. Now my 3B, I am not taking that 3B all the way to as far as I did the 4H. Okay, so my 3B is going to stop shorter than that. So, and I'm just guessing. I'll know when I start, but I might stop at maybe perhaps about right here. Okay, but I'm not going to take it all the way over here to where I have the 4H because I want this to look like a gradated scale, light or white to light gray to medium gray to a dark gray. Again, we're not doing black yet. Okay, so I'm going to walk around and just kind of check your progress before I do that, and then I'll show you how to start that. If you feel confident about starting, you can go ahead and do that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and show you how to add the 3B. Again, I'm not going to take the 3B as far down as I did the 4H, so it's going to stop. I'm just guessing again, maybe right here. We'll see. So I'm going to turn my paper. And again, I want to keep the same diagonal that I've been using. You make sure I have a good edge to shade with. So always start in the darkest area. Now, I really do think sort of the key with a lot of this, at least what I have found that works for me, everybody's going to be different though, is I like to kind of stay on the lighter side with everything, look at it, and then assess where I need to make things darker. I find by sort of taking my time with that, I have less problems to fix at the end, and that in turn saves me time. So. Now, every time I get close to the edge of my cash shadow or the edge of my paper, I slow down just so I can control what I'm doing. I don't want to mess up those edges, and I don't want to work past them. Alright, I gotta see how far I've gotten. So just keep an eye on where you're at since we are covering up our project. You don't want to go too far with this 3B. Alright, so I think I'm ready to kind of blend it out. I'm about probably, I'd say about half at the midpoint of my paper. Kind of, and every time I try to blend out or to a different value, I lift the pressure. I take pressure off of my pencil, so I'm barely letting the pencil touch the paper, just lightly grazing over it until I see it disappear. So this is what mine looks like with a layer of 3B on it. I am going to go and add some more 3B here at the end just to kind of darken it up a little bit. Again, every step of the way you want to keep that diagonal. Again, we're not going for black. That'll be another day. That's kind of like, that's like the best part. It's right at the very end. When you add that black where it needs to go, then you just see everything pop. All right. Now, if you do find that you're starting to lose the edge of your paper, especially over on the dark side, into your background or the back wall, don't worry about that. We will address those issues, which it's only natural that you have some of those. Alright, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to switch to my 6B, I'm going to very lightly add some 6B over here on the darker side of my paper. But again, I don't want the darkest value. I'm just going for like a medium dark. And that's just, it shouldn't take me too long to add this either. It's going to take me just a little bit since it's just going to be over here on the end. And again, it's not going to go all the way down to even where my 3B is. Kind of fade that off. Okay, so that's what I have so far for my paper. Again, you can tell very easily, and I'm going to fold this worksheet so you guys can kind of see. But you can tell that, I definitely, that's my darkest value there. I'm definitely not that dark. I'm right in here. Or maybe even a little bit lighter, about right here. And that's fine. That's going to help you. And you can see also too here, I'm starting to lose the back edge of my paper into the background. I'll fix that later. That's not anything to worry about. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time here to work on the paper, and then the next step, I'm going to show you how to do the cast shadow. Okay, so we're ready to start the cast shadow. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my worksheet around, and I know what you're doing. I have a bad habit of not unfreezing this stuff, so Tempest, watch that for me. Give me the... Okay, so cast shadow. So I've got my sphere. This is from our worksheet. So if you guys remember... Let's see what you guys remember from doing this. The cast shadow. Did we use any 4H on the cast shadow on the worksheet? On the cast shadow on the worksheet? This? No. No, we only used 3B and 6B on this, okay? So we're only going to be using 2 pencils on the cast shadow, okay? Here's my next question. Where is your cast shadow the darkest? Yes, right under the object. So for us, here, this was where the darkest part of our cast shadow was on the sphere. Darkest part of our cast shadow on the apple is going to be right underneath it, okay? And then what's going to happen to the cast shadow's value as it stretches away from your apple? It's going to get lighter. Here's the tricky part, though, is that even though the cast shadow is getting lighter as it stretches away from the apple, that cast shadow still needs to be darker than the darkest parts of our paper. This is why, one of the reasons why I kept emphasizing we don't want this to get too dark, okay? Because this needs to be darker here, but needs to even get darker over here. So we're in a tricky spot, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to start with our 3B, okay? Now here's the other tricky part. This cast shadow is not a separate object. Okay? The cast shadow is just simply a shadow on top of the paper, which we have already shaded about half of it, technically. So we want these lines that we're going to shade inside this cast shadow to go in the same direction as the lines above and below it. So we need to make sure that these lines match. So you're not going to shade your cast shadow lines going in a different direction. You're going to go in the same direction. This is going to help make the cast shadow look like it's just a shadow on top of the paper, okay? And so then, the hope is that you'll end up with something like this at the end, okay? The other thing you'll also notice, too, the longer your cast shadow is, and there's a few of you guys that have long cast shadows like mine, is that you'll notice that the edge of the cast shadow is really crisp right here at the beginnings of it. But then as it stretches away, that cast shadow's edge gets a little blurry. It's not quite as sharp. It's a little fuzzy. And so that's something else that we're going to kind of do, and I'll show you how to do when we do this, okay? All right, so I'm going to kind of move this stuff. I'm going to start again. Actually, I'm going to start the opposite. I'm going to start towards the apple because that's the darkest part. I always like to start the darkest part. I'm going to again take my paper that I'm using to protect my work. I'm going to take that and make sure I have that at the same angle as my lines that I used to shade the paper that we just did. Okay? So I want that to match. I'm just going to start right under here. And I'm just going for a thin layer of 3B. So even though I know this area is going to get darker, I'm not ready to commit to that yet. I want to make sure that my lines are going in the same direction as the rest of my paper. That's why I'm using this paper not only to block my or protect my drawing, but also to just serve as a guide. Now when I'm around the apple, and because this is sort of a tight area right here, I do take this pretty slow because, again, I want to make sure that I'm keeping this edge nice and neat. I don't want to get too sloppy. I don't want to shade over top of my apple or past the edge of the cast shadow. So it takes me a while to get this started. And then when I get past the apple, it does get a little bit easier. Again, I'm just going for a thin layer of 3B. Just need to get this started so I can see what I need to do. This also goes slow too, just because you got to keep your lines in check. You need to make sure that you're keeping up that same diagonal used for the rest of the drawing, or for the rest of that paper. Getting just a little bit off on. And it's not unusual for me to find that I am a little off on my lines. I just got to catch it before I get too far and just try to correct it. And again, you will see in parts, and I'm in that section where I kind of lose the edge of my cast shadow, and that's fine. I can still see it. I still have to go through and build that stuff up. So this is just, again, the beginning. Of course, I have a long cast shadow, so this takes me a while to fill this in. Okay, so that's what that looks like with a layer of 3B on it, obviously not finished. So what I'm going to do now, I can see that right underneath this apple it's pretty dark, so I'm going to go ahead and just darken right up underneath that. I'm still just using my 3B pencil. I'm also sort of dealing with fighting against some of these old pencil lines. Looks like I redrew the bottom of my apple and it indented the paper a little bit there. So I'm going to kind of fill that in. You can see I'm kind of losing the bottom edge of my apple. I'll fix that again later. And even as you go through and you darken underneath here, you want to make sure you keep that diagonal line intact. This is also, too, a good opportunity for me to just kind of fill in some of these gaps. And I definitely need to just overall make my shadow darker. I'm just adding more 3B throughout this whole thing. So that's what I've got after I've put my second layer of 3B on there. You can see I've already got this a bit darker. I'm still running into the problem right here, and this is exactly the same problem I had when I was on this project here, is that I need to, even though this cast shadow needs to get lighter as it comes out here, I still need it to be darker than the paper. So you can see it, and I can see it on my paper when I look at the actual still life. So I'm going to move on to my 6B. And when I start doing this stuff, now that I've got pretty good layers on here, I do tend to kind of go in different directions with my pencil. At this point, I've established that diagonal line, and I think I can do that. All right, so I'm actually going to kind of start down here. And when I'm doing this, so I want to be very careful. I don't want this to get too dark where I can't get my darkest value here. So I'm in a tricky spot. I need this to be darker, but not as dark as my darkest. So I'm just going to very slowly build up this 6B down here until I can see the edge. And then once I see the edge, I'm going to stop. I don't want to make it too dark. Okay. So now you can see I am going in a different direction with my lines. That also, too, helps to kind of fill in the paper, the tooth of the paper. At this point, I've already got those diagonal lines established, so it should be okay. If I feel like I'll lose them, I can always go back over and just reestablish my diagonal lines. See even some variation in the shadow. See another shape in here kind of happening. Okay. And then there's, of course, like gaps in my shading too, like where it's right up against the apple or the edge of the cast shadow with the paper. And I might have to go in and kind of patch some of that stuff up. I still don't have my darkest value on here yet, though. I know I can get darker, which is good. Gives me something to kind of play around with. And then definitely with as long as my cast shadow is, as it stretches out, the definition of it kind of gets fuzzy. So I don't want it to be as sharp down here as it is down here. Okay, so this is what I've got so far. Am I done with it? Probably not. Probably going to have some other things that I'll do to it. I know I have some variation in there that I need to plug in. I see some darker shapes even within my shadow. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to give you guys some time to work on the cast shadow and anything else that you need to touch up and stuff. And then the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys how to shade in the stem and then how to do the cast shadow of the stem. So that will be next. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to show you guys is how to shade in the stem and do the cast shadow for that. And I said this off camera, but I'm just going to say it on camera so that way everybody hears. You should not feel like you're finished with any of these parts, okay? Everything should be maybe 1 or 2 steps from being done. I'm purposely leaving parts unfinished so that I can resolve everything together. You can never start and finish one section before you see how it relates to the rest of it. Okay, so the stem. Let's talk about the stem a little bit. I'm going to zoom into this part. I need to put this a little bit over. So the stem is pretty dark in color. So I'm not going to use any 4H on this because there's nothing really light about it, except there's an exception. I am getting some highlights on my stem. So what I'm going to do, I don't think I can do that anymore. I am going to draw the shapes of the highlights that I see on the stem so that I know not to shade in those. So I'm going to draw where I see those highlights. I've got 2. Who knows if I can keep them? Let's see. So I've got 2 highlights that I see, like 2 little dots on the end. Let's see if I can. Kind of hard to see. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with my 3B. Okay? So right now I have a fairly decent point. There, you can see that better. A little point there on my 3B. A little decent point on my 6B. It would help to have, if your pencil is really dull, it would be helpful to sharpen your pencil before you start shading the stem. Okay, so I'm going to start with the 3B pencil, and I'm just going to give this a layer of 3B over the whole thing, except for where I put those highlights. Now you'll notice I'm going to kind of lose. It's going to be hard to see my stem, and that's okay. I just need to make sure I work around those highlights. And then what I'm going to do, I think I need to make mine a little bit thicker. There we go. Then I'm going to take my 6B, and I need to make the stem get darker as it comes down into that valley. So as it goes down into the apple, it should be getting darker. Because the lower it goes into that valley, the harder it is for it to get to the light. So the light can't get to it down here. And then I do have a little shadow that kind of happens right under the top of it. And so there's my stem. That's it. I'm done. Done with the stem. But I also have a cast shadow that goes up and kind of goes up over, and it gets lost and stops right here. I'm just going to draw that, kind of draw and shade it in at the same time. The important thing is that when you do this, if you watch my pencil, you got to think about how it would sort of, if you were to take a marker and draw on top of this apple, how it would come up and curve. It curves up here at the top. So I'm going to very lightly, with my 3B pencil, kind of shade this up, and then I'm going to curve it. just like so. Again, the edges kind of get a little fuzzy up here at the top, and then it does get darker further down it goes. So I used a little bit of 6B down here at the base of that shadow. And then I am going to use a little bit of 4H. I need to make the edges here a little fuzzier, not so sharp, because it starts to lose its sharpness as it comes up. So there we go. There's the cast shadow for the stem. I'm going to zoom out. Take this off here. So now I'm ready to deal with some issues that I have, which there's plenty for me to deal with here. One of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to darken the darkest side of my back wall so that this edge of the paper shows up more. I don't think I'm going to darken the paper at this point, because if I do that, then it probably means I'm going to have to do something to this. And I think I'm in a good place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to darken up the darkest side of my back wall so this back edge shows up more. And then I'll go in and address some other areas to darken on my apple at a different time. So if you're having a problem also too with seeing this edge right here, an easy solution for you would be to darken the back wall. So I've got my 6B. And I'm just going to darken this darkest edge, or darkest side. If you find that some of the issues that you have is maybe your values are not blending or gradating out where they need to be, maybe that's the issue you need to work on. If you find that you can't see an edge and an edge that you should see, then you need to figure out, usually if you can't see an edge that should be showing up, it's because you don't have enough contrast between two values. You just need to very simply ask yourself, what should be darker? Whatever your answer is, that's what you need to do. So it's a lot of comparing and contrasting. And this is going to sound silly, but you also need to listen to what your drawing is telling you. So if you can't see something, it's because you don't have enough contrast. All right, so I'm going to give you guys the rest of the time here in class to kind of fix some things like blending or patches that you might see. Again, we still haven't really gone through and added, we're not done. We're still going to add our darkest value throughout parts of the drawing. We did do that kind of up here in the stem, but you can see I definitely have some issues here at the bottom of my apple. It's getting lost. Those are things that I will solve and show you guys how I solve those at our next class. So.